Finance Minister Arun Jaitley is not surely amused by RBI Governor Rajan's one-eyed king comment. In an exclusive interview with ET Now in New York, Jaitley raised a toast to India's growth story, although he added that the country could do a lot better. The FM's comments come even as Rajan clarified that he was quoted out of context. The RBI Governor, however, cautioned against complacency on the policy front.
The Finance Minister says that the government will go full throttle on the reform agenda, although a lot will depend on the monsoon. On the NPA mess for India's banking system, he asserted that the government will empower public sector banks to deal with willful defaulters, including MALLYA himself. The Finance Minister says that global investors are upbeat about India and the ongoing tax tussle with Vodafone will not have any impact on the dollar inflows. The big Finance Minister interview and some of the clarification that's coming in from Rajan himself, asserting that India will have to go for many, many years to make growth sustainable, and the fact that the one-eyed remark was quoted out of context is a top story right here on India Tonight.
Now, compared to the rest of the world, if you have a 7.5% growth rate or a little above that, I think India is doing remarkably well. The kind of challenges of poverty eradication, particularly, and knowing our own potential, I think we have a potential to do better. And therefore, I had said it in my budget speech also, compared to the rest of the world, we are doing very well. But by our own standards, we ourselves are a little impatient. We'd like to do better.
Outperformance was accentuated because world growth was weak. But we in India were still hungry for more growth. I then explained that we were not yet at our potential, though we were at a cusp of a substantial pickup in growth given all the reforms that were underway, the renaissance that Sri Rai talked about. In our news-hungry country, however, our domestic papers headlined the phrase I used. To be fair, they offered the surrounding context, but few read beyond the headline. This is not to disparage what has been done and is being done. The central and state governments have been creating a platform for strong and sustainable growth, and I'm confident the payoffs from all this are on their way. We cannot get carried away by our current superiority in growth, for as soon as we start believing in our own superiority and start distributing future wealth as if we already have it, we stop doing all that is required to continue growing.
Okay, the global economic uncertainty and a volatile oil market are clouding India's growth prospects. That's a signal from Finance Minister Arun Jaitley in an exclusive chat with ET Now. Finance Minister is pinning his hopes on monsoon and reforms even as he looks to woo top dollar. FM says the dragging Vodafone to Supreme Court by the government was indeed justified. Let's get you a slice of the exclusive conversation that he had with ET Now in New York.
Well, I think it's reasonably possible for India to maintain its current level of growth. Now, there are some variables, and obviously the variables will impact. Growth returning to the rest of the world itself is a variable. If it does, it's good for us. Oil prices, if they don't go out of control once again, I think, which they're not likely to, some minor increases we can absorb is fair enough for us. Domestically, if there's a good monsoon, as the indications by the Met Department are, I think it adds to our ability to improve upon the growth rates, which in turn can also improve on domestic demand, particularly rural demand. And that can help India's private sector, because private sector has been stressed. Of course, a lot also depends on how the current reform programs of the government continues. We are fairly determined to continue the reform program. And once progressive steps like the bankruptcy law, the GST, etc. are implemented, I think it can create a favorable environment in the general body of investors as far as India is concerned, increase economic activity in India, and certainly help us.
You mentioned the monsoon, Mr. Jaitley, but some people feel that India might be overstating the positive impact of a monsoon. What do you say to that?
No, I'm not overstating or understating the impact, but it's a harsh reality that in a country where a lot of land is rain-fed agriculture depends on monsoon. It's not that agricultural production will very significantly increase the GDP. It will have a marginal impact. But the fact that it improves upon the purchasing power of the agricultural community as such, that spiral effect on the growth is much more, because there are some sectors which had slowed down over the years which will suddenly pick up.
Now, while the Indian growth story that you are projecting and the Indian government is projecting is one of things being rosy again, we recently had the RBI governor, Rajan, say that India is like a one-eyed king in the land of the blind. How do you respond to a statement like that?
See, I think if you look at the totality of the picture, if you look at the rest of the world faces a grim and a challenging situation. And this challenging situation in the world has slowed down global growth. And therefore, the world is certainly, from a point of view of growth, facing one of the most serious challenges.
Going to taxes, something that foreign institutional investors definitely look at. While we have talked about reducing tax terror in India, we've also seen recently that the government has moved against the Supreme Court against Vodafone's transfer pricing order. What do you make of that? And is that really sending a good signal when it comes to tax reform and tax policies in India?
Why should the government not file an appeal if it thinks there is an appealable order? There is no company in the world which is immune from paying taxation. There are important questions of law which go to the Supreme Court. This case has nothing to do with the retrospective tax issue.
At the same time, Finance Minister, even as you meet people in New York and DC, a lot of companies talk about tax issues in India and retroactive tax. So when they see the Vodafone case...
Tax is an issue of the past. It's an issue which the previous government has created. It's an issue which we have resolved. We have given... except the one or two cases which are pending, for which also we have given several options of resolving the issues. There can't be a principle, because if a company had once an issue of retrospective taxation, this company is immune from some other forms of taxation. So if there are legitimate issues with regard to other areas, it's between the company and the tax department to sort them out.
But even given what happened with Vodafone, would you project that in the future years, taxation in India is going to be more uniform and better suited towards companies' interests?
We want a predictable tax regime, and therefore that predictability of the tax regime is ensured by not having retrospective taxation. And that's a clear policy of the government which I have announced.
And in what other ways do you think, Minister Jaitley, have you been able to soothe nerves here abroad with regards to the tax situation in India?
I think people are investors are very competent, they're very clever people. They understand the sea change that has taken place in India, and I don't have to smoothen any nerves. Investors are very enthusiastic about India, they're very bullish about India.
Moving to the MALLYA case, now that the non-bailable warrant has been issued, how will the government, or does the government ensure that MALLYA will return to India and that he will face authorities?
On the court procedures, you have investigative agencies looking into criminal law matters, you have banks looking into their settlement matters, and I think both are extremely competent institutions who will act strictly within the parameters of law. As far as the banks are concerned, it's their responsibility based on commercial considerations to make sure that no defaulter manages to get away. Merely by escaping the geographical boundaries of India, you don't run away from liabilities that you owe to the public system.
But given that you're saying that, Mr. Jaitley, do you think it's then to make an example of the MALLYA case and send a strong signal to defaulters?
What else are the investigating agencies and the banks doing? After all, they are sending a very strong signal that the public debts owed to commercial banks, you can't just run away from the liability if you have a responsibility to pay. And the banks will ensure that the banks are reimbursed.
Now, on this trip, and also I think on previous occasions, India has taken up the issue of H-1B's visa hike with the government. But do you think the US government will actually take some steps to respond to your request, or is it now just a policy of overprotectionism?
It's our responsibility to and our duty to bring this to the knowledge of the US government, for the simple reason that this is a discrimination particularly qua India, and therefore Indian IT professionals have a lot to pay. And in very clear terms, we've told the US administration this is for them to take a decision now. It's their sovereign matter.
Talking about reform, which you've also touched upon during your trip a lot, there is a feeling still that the reform process may have slowed down, and there are some important bills that may be, coming across hurdles.
There is no feeling to this effect because the reform process has been very consistent. Obviously, all reforms don't take place in a day. A government has a 5-year term, and as I've said, we have our hands full with a lot of reform agendas. Many have taken place in the last 2 years, and many are in the pipeline.
How confident are you then of the GST happening in the next?
The numbers are changing, and the numbers are changing for the better in the upper house, and I'm sure the GST will be passed sooner than later.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.